I was born on the Fylde coast in Lancashire, and I've always instinctively felt an attraction towards the sea, which is why I title them like this. And I'm going to start with... that's a portrait of my wife. We'd just done a 40-mile walk for charity and ended up on the south coast. I think it was Eastbourne, and we were pretty tired, and I had the windows open. She had a streaming cold, but she sat for about 20 hours to begin this painting. Now, it's really difficult with this sort of screen, but that painting is 6 feet high. So all my pictures, the heads, the faces tend to be life-size, and it's perhaps worth bearing that in mind. The interest for me here, it's not to do with the rest of the paintings I show, but just the idea that there's always this instinctive feeling, response when I'm in front of the sea, in front of water. I want to deal with it. And that's a portrait of me waiting to deal with some students in Chelsea. And I used to drive in early in the morning to London and wait for 2 or 3 hours before they turned up in the studio. And there are a lot of things in there. It's an autobiographical painting. The feathers that I'm holding, the gull's feathers, relate to a period when I was at Kingston School of Art, and we were taught to sharpen pencils, make our own pencils, work with duck's quills for drawing. We were always by the river. We drew every day, throughout the year, until our fingers were really ridged with holding pencils and what have you. But the fun thing for me was a little cormorant that used to come when I was working there and sit on that pole. So that became an integral part of the painting. But again, I was interested in the sludge of the mud, what came up, what appeared out of the water. You never knew. It could be a shopping trolley, it could be anything. And that was done at Battersea Reach near Chelsea. And then around that time, through a colleague in the Royal Society, Ted Greenman, I was given a commission, this is a commission, by the RNLI to paint the most famous living lifeboat man. This is Coxswain Dick Evans, and you'll see here the 2 gold medals he won. Now that's equivalent in RNLI terms to 2 Victoria Crosses. This is an incredibly brave man. And this was painted, this is the first life study I did, in his kitchen in Molesford in Anglesey. He's totally bald, he's blind, he was in his late 80s when I did this. Put his cap on his head and he, oh boy, I feel better with that. And you know, I had this instant rapport with him. So these studies are terribly important. So this is the life study, the first one I did. And while I was painting from Dick, his wife, who spoke only Welsh, was being drawn in their sitting room by my wife to keep her busy. He was a fantastic man, and if my voice breaks with emotion even now, it is because he is probably the most charismatic person I've ever met. This was the scene of a rescue he did in 1959, for which he got the gold medal, and it's on the rocks off Molesford. There was a huge storm, and there was a ship called the cargo vessel, based, I think, from Liverpool, and it was driven onto the rocks. And the plates of the ship are still there today, I believe. And these little black marks are suggesting what I could see. This was painted on the cliff in a bit of a gale, so it's quite a hard thing to do with your easel bucking around in the wind. But I wanted to feel, as much as I could, what he'd gone through. So this, although it's a sketch study, it's a really important piece from my point of view, because it led to this watercolour. This is how Dick was in his kitchen, and the air around him seemed to be alive with what he was describing. And it was terribly, terribly moving. And at the bottom in Welsh is, I believe, so he told me, "Please God, guide me." And what he did, the hind lee was driven onto the rocks. He brought his ship out. I think they were out for 12 hours in an open boat. And he was tied to the wheel with ropes. As soon as they went down the slip into the water in Morpher, it's so steep that he was soaked. So he's covered in seawater, out for 12 hours, freezing conditions. The lifeboat, which was open, an open deck, was brought in. They saved everybody on this ship, I think 12 people in total. At one point, they came in between the rocks and the boat itself, so they were in this position. And during that rescue, the craft was actually landed on the deck of the Hindley. And it's a very famous rescue. But this little watercolour is about what I was experiencing when I met this man. He was in his late 80s, possibly early 90s at this point. I was asked by RNLI to paint him as he was when he was coxswain of the Mull for a Lifeboat, which was some 40 or 50 years previous. And to do it, there's not a system, forensic reconstruction process, which I think was invented by a Russian called Gerasimov, an anthropologist, in about 1965, which most people will be familiar with now, where you build up a face from the bones and you work out where the tissues were and so forth. Now, Dick, this was painted from life on the steps of the lifeboat station, and we're standing with this slope right before us, and he's blind, and he said, "I nearly fell off," and I felt dreadful. But those three paintings are hugely important, because this one, which was the commission, describes the hero. It's not a great painting. I did a huge amount of research to find out the sort of boat, which is in Cardiff, that he might have used. It's a romantic painting. He was a butcher by profession. He had hands like crane grabs. And the most difficult thing was painting him as he was. I had no information. I had, I think, one rotten little photograph of him at that time. So I had to try and decipher what was going on. So I don't know if I can go back on that. Is it that one? Those two are very closely related. It was presented in front of him in Anglesey by the RNLI, and his second mate, I think, on the ship came up. It was a big audience, and he came up and they looked at the painting, and he said, "Oh boy, you've got him." And you know, that's 50 years prior. So even though I don't think it's a great picture, it's for me a very moving one. And then following on from that, in the Millennium period, we did a whole set of paintings for the Royal Society on people's portraits. And I asked RNLI, the director, Ray Kipling, was there a crew that I could deal with? You know, this is going on. I'm interested in what they do. And he gave me access to the crew at Foy in Cornwall. And of course, everything has changed. And this was a very quick, quite large painting of their boat sitting on the river at Foy. Totally different from Anglesey, totally different from that sort of wild north water, but still full of problems as a seagoing area. There are 2 crews for this boat. They are, I can't remember, about 11 or 12 per crew. So there are 24 people actually involved as volunteers. And the crew immediately concerned with that boat came forward gradually. They were ordinary guys, shipbuilder, ex-marine, professional cocks, second cocks, guys who'd come from different walks of life, and they're out there every day on call if necessary. So they were very different from Dick Evans, and I tried to reflect that in the way that I dealt with them. I know that he used to build coracles and all sorts of things. I mean, really interesting people. But they're in a totally different situation. And, you know, they have radios, they have every conceivable modern device to help them when they perform a rescue. And this young lad, I went out with them, and to show me their prowess, they threw him overboard because he's the young one, and then rescued him, which is why I got the helmet. They're quite funny, and I think he's in charge of the lifeboat station, and his son is the one on the extreme right. So this painting is 10 feet long, and it started on the spot with a smaller study, and the more I did, the more interested they became, and the more of them turned up, and so it sort of extended like that. You know, it wasn't pre-planned. So they're good guys, and probably most of them are still on that boat, I should think. And that's the last contact I've had with the RNLI. And then subsequently, in another situation, I met this gentleman, Admiral Sir James Burnell-Nugent, and I met him in London, where I had a painting being shown, and we got into conversation straight away, and I said, well, I'm always been interested in the Navy. I'd love to come down to Portsmouth or Plymouth or wherever and go see what you're doing. And what was so fantastic, and I love about the Navy, is that within 3 days there was an appointment made, bang, and we were meeting up and setting something in motion. And this pastel came out as a result of going around Portsmouth Harbour with him in a naval pinnace. He was C&C Fleet, so the guy in charge of the whole shebang, really. And this particular point, we were looking at Ark Royal, and behind us was a whole stack of ships which were derelict and they couldn't get rid of. And it was this, it's like a sort of sad tale for me, because the Navy is being reduced all the time. Subsequent to this, I went out on Ark Royal and various other vessels on a few exercises, and it was an incredible experience, because you realize just how much technology there is involved in a Navy nowadays. And when we were out off the coast, they knew, for example, where every single vessel was in the channel. Everything from a canoe to a motorboat to anything you could think of. And we talk about defense and protection. The vigilance is incredible. This gentleman I met on Ark Royal, it's the Honourable Captain Cochrane. He was in charge of FOST, which is one of the Navy acronyms, which I find so difficult to manage, but it's Flag Officer Sea Training. And it demonstrates an avenue that the Navy deals with now, which is training other nations, other services in how to sail, how to run a fleet properly. What I liked about him, apart from the fact that we got on, and there he is, was that there was something vaguely of the Napoleonic era about him in terms of his face. And he got on this suit, which you have to wear when you go up in helicopters to stop you freezing if you get in the water. And it seemed to be resonant of Nelson's day. And so I had that very much in mind when I was drawing him. And not a great painting, it was a very quick oil study, but that is the captain of Ark Royal steering it while refueling, which is a really incredibly difficult and dangerous exercise. And the two things that I noticed about this is that he was very hands-on. He's got a whole team working with him, all of them issuing instructions and correlating their data as they're steering. If you imagine a rather wide car, if you think about an aircraft carrier, it's quite a problem to keep in a straight line going at a particular speed. And I was quite fascinated by that interaction between them. This is just one little thing. And that is the commanding officer of the amphibious group of Marines on Ark Royal, who's a rather good-looking man. And I met him on a couple more occasions up in Scotland. And this one was trying to put over what it felt like being on a carrier with all the things that are happening. So you've got about 9 decks with people almost in a rabbit warren of steel environment, all doing different things, but all connected. And so I think I was trying to get that over. Above, you have officers watching various helicopters landing. You have all the accompanying ships. This painting is about 9 feet high, I think. Below you have the Admiral watching the whole procedure. And so I thought I'll try and separate the two now. It probably makes it more understandable what was happening. This is a sea day for training where they invite a few people out with them. I'm interested in naval architecture. I think I find the forms really interesting, so I did find it a stimulating situation. And there's Burnell-Nugent in his Admiral's cabin, not necessarily supervising all proceedings, but at least having an eye on what's going on. What was fascinating about him, and I was talking to Jeff Hunt earlier about it, is that I went to one lecture he gave, and he knew where every single ship in the Navy was at that moment, on that day. And I thought, that is fantastic. And then I thought, well, actually, to know that, there must be a reducing number of ships, because you just couldn't possibly have done that, say, 40 years ago. And then the last things I'm going to show, something that I'm working on at the moment, which probably will be a book about Navy training, because I'm not being subsidized for it. I have to pay for it myself. So it's a long endeavor. But I've found the whole experience of going out with them on ships very interesting. This is a photograph by Edward Steichen, an American photographer of huge repute and of great artistic integrity. And he was probably very, very important in introducing Picasso and various other significant 20th century artists to an American public. And as a photographer, he was preeminent. He took this, it's an infrared photograph of the USS Lexington before a big strike. And I've always admired that picture. So the last thing I want to show at the moment is this little picture. It's in the process of being worked in this particular photograph, which is a pastel of the destroyer I went on, which was the Gloucester. And the Gloucester, unfortunately, is now razor blades. They've chopped it up maybe a couple of weeks ago. And today is Trafalgar Day. It's the most important day in the Royal Navy's calendar as a memorial time. And this particular vessel is significant in that it's, whether you appreciate it or not, is the first naval craft to have shot down an incoming missile with a missile. And it did that, I don't know, in the Gulf War, protecting the USS Missouri. And it shot it down with these Sea Dart missiles, which should be sticking out of the picture, but it's the only one that's ever happened. And I went out on her from Faslane on an exercise, an international exercise. I had a great time on board this, and then I was transported off to Bulwark, and my memory of that, probably one of the most frightening things of my life, is being winched off the back of the destroyer up into a helicopter wearing a giant baby grow. No shoes on, this waterproof garment you have to wear in case you drop into the water, which is freezing. And all my gear had gone up before me, so I felt really quite naked. And this is going to be my final picture. My legs and the bottom of the destroyer underneath me. It really was quite an experience. For an old man, terrifying. And that's all I really have to say.